we talk about this in our lectures on Christianity and mythology, and that is that if you listen to the the Enlightenment, right? They got, especially later on, just obsessed with the idea of evolution, not just the evolution of like animals and human life and so forth, but evolution was just simply the key to the understanding of all knowledge. So also of history, right? Everything evolved, and you went from stupider to smarter and so forth. So they have, like your caveman, right? Chesterton does an awesome job of just dismantling the idea of the caveman.
Yes.
Of this like brute that hits a woman and drags her into a cave, right? And has his way with her. There's no evidence for that whatsoever. Instead, you have evidence of an intelligent human being who is making art, right, in a cave, probably with some religious significance and so forth. And he, that dude who made that artwork, right, in the cave, he probably went back to his house in his city.
Yeah.
So cities have been there from the beginning. Cain built cities. And at the same time as you have cities, you also have hunter-gatherer societies. This has happened all throughout ancient history. All you have to do is look at like the Gauls, who are hunter-gatherers, wanderers, and at the same time as Athens exists, right? And Troy exists and so forth, and Rome. And you have the same thing with the Mongols. This right? You always have, and even to this day, in the 21st century, you have hunter-gatherers, tribal people, right, in Africa, for instance, and at the same time, big cities, right? So it's always existed, coexisting. So to have a city like Babel early on, right after the flood, is not surprising. It fits perfectly with the history of the ancient world. That a city would develop where it did, right in the cradle of civilization there, in Mesopotamia, is also in line with history, because it is history. The way civilizations develop is that you have to have agriculture. You have to be able to store up grain. And if you have rivers like the Euphrates and the Tigris, or the Nile, which is the other place, there's a cradle of civilization. You have slow flowing rivers, and they're easily irrigated. And so you can easily, like even you or I could do this, right? Build the canal, water your crops, and so forth. Yep. And once you have that, then you can specialize in different trades and so forth, because you can buy grain, right? As long as you can buy grain, store grain, then you don't need to grow it yourself. And instead, you can become, a woodworker. You can become a shipbuilder. You can become this or that, because you can buy your food, right? You can trade for it. So that's how civilization happened. So that Babylon, or Babel, right, grows up in Mesopotamia, makes sense, right? So that's one thing about the Tower of Babel. The second thing about the Tower of Babel is that cities are famously liberal. Cities are where you can sort of forget about God, because you can forget about nature, and you're surrounded by the work of man's hands, right? This is why still today your more rural communities are going to be more religious, right? That's why, like, every time I go to an airport, I'm just like, so many people, I wonder how many of them are Christians. I don't know if that happens to you.
No.
I'm always thinking about that, because you don't see. You're in a plane, right? You have an aisle seat, and you're not looking at nature, and then you're all of a sudden in this airport where there's like 1 million people, right? And all you're seeing is the work of man's hands, man's industry, and so forth. And for a lot of people, right, that is faith shaking, right? And that's why cities are known for being havens of whatever it is: atheism, liberal ideas, and unbelief, right? God never orders the building of a city in the entire Bible. The first city that he orders building of is the heavenly Jerusalem, right? Which of course isn't a literal city. Instead, Cain builds cities, and then Babel is built obviously against his command. Even in the takeover of the Canaanites, they take over cities. They don't build cities themselves. Jerusalem is not built by the Israelites. Jerusalem is taken over by from the Jebusites. Right. So not a single time that God commands the building of cities in the Bible. I think that's very significant.
That's interesting. Yeah.
And obviously, what happens then when humans, right, rely on their own industry, their own wisdom, right, and they become their own echo chamber, and they're not seeing God's creation. They're not afraid, right, of the floods anymore, and they're not afraid of the lightning anymore, and they're not afraid of all of those signs of nature that show them that God exists and that God is in control, and they are not, because they've asserted control. Look at us, right? It's like the Titanic, right? Not even God can sink this ship. Which of course was asking God to sink this ship. Not that I'm saying anything there, right? But that's what happened with Babel, right? Look at what we can do. And God said, no, you can't. I'm in charge.